Welcome to Citizen Talk, the show that restores prudence to politics. I'm Juan Davalos.
And I'm Clifford Humphrey, sitting in for Lynette Grundvig today.
And you're listening to Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. Today, Clifford, we're going to be talking, continuing a theme we've been talking for the past couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the administrative state and what that means. Last week, we talked with Tara Ross regarding the Electoral College. And both of those issues are going to be coming in today, and they are actually very important for the topic of the show, which is prudence. Clifford, since you're our guest today, what is prudence?
Well, I thought I was going to get to ask you that question, Juan.
I know, that's why I started.
Yeah, very right. So prudence, as I understand it, is understanding having a good understanding of what the ends are that you're aiming for, and for prudence to be distinguished from cunning, I think, which is an important distinction.
Or clever,
right. Prudence has to be the true human good, and for a political community, that is the flourishing of a political society. And then the right means to get there are going to vary depending upon the circumstances, but you can't lose sight of that all-important end, which is human flourishing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly. On our show, we like to say that prudence is the ability to know what the right means are to achieve the right end, or knowing what the right thing to do is at the right time, considering all the circumstances. And so like we said, we're talking about the Electoral College, and more specifically about the 2020 census. In the Constitution, it says that the country needs to hold a census every 10 years to account for the number of inhabitants in the country. And this is very important. Why is this important, Cliff?
Well, because we are a republic, but we are a representative republic, and so that means that the whole people of America do not get together to establish law, but we pick our representatives, and those people represent the people distributed across the whole country. But it's really important that the number of representatives be an accurate reflection of their constituents. So
right, and that their constituents are actual citizens, and not other people that might be there just as tourists or illegally in the country.
Right. I think that's such a common sense thing that I don't think when they were writing the Constitution, when they chose the word inhabitants, it seems to me that they didn't need to specify citizens, although there is a place in the Federalist Papers where Madison refers to them in one place as inhabitants and another place as citizens, speaking about the same group of people. So in my opinion, it seems those were in there. That was common sense. Of course, we're talking about the people of America, the citizens, not the people who are here accidentally, you might say.
Exactly. And what we're going to be doing today is we have, actually there's two different cases right now, two different lawsuits going up, making their way up to the Supreme Court. One of them is in the District Court of New York that was challenging the idea that the Department of Commerce, the Department of Commerce was trying, the ones that conduct the census were trying to add a citizenship question to the census, asking, are you a citizen of the United States? That case is going up to the Supreme Court. But another little less known case is the one we're actually going to be talking about today.
Yeah, this is a case that the state of Alabama, through their district attorney, is bringing against the Commerce Department. And a co-signer on that case is a guest that we have on the show today, Congressman Morris Brooks from the 5th District of Alabama, who's going to be explaining to us the import that this case has for federalism, the Electoral College, representation, and self-government generally.
So with us today to talk about this different case, we have Representative Morris Brooks from the 5th District of Alabama with us today. Welcome to Citizen Talk, Representative Brooks.
My pleasure, and just as an aside, no one back home knows me as Morris. I go by Mo.
Oh,
Sounds
okay,
good.
Perfect. Good to know. So we understand that you and the Attorney General of Alabama have filed a lawsuit regarding the census that's coming up in 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about what that lawsuit is about in respects to the Electoral College, and why is that important for us to know?
The census determines who gets which congressman and determines, likewise, how many Electoral College votes that each state gets. Alabama right now has 7 congressmen, plus our 2 senators. That means we have 9 Electoral College votes. And so every 10 years when you have a census, those numbers from those censuses determine the number of congressmen Electoral College votes that each of the 50 states gets. Now, in the last census, there was roughly 11 million illegal aliens, according to the Census Bureau. You've got a Yale study out there that says there's about 23, 24, 25 million illegal aliens. Our lawsuit asked the federal courts to direct the Census Bureau to not count illegal aliens for the purposes of this redistribution of congressional seats and Electoral College votes. The reason for that is we believe that Americans should be the ones that determine who our congressmen are and who our president is. And to the extent you give political weight to illegal aliens in the distribution of congressional seats and Electoral College votes, then you're diluting the votes and political influence of American citizens. In the state of Alabama, if illegal aliens are counted, that probably means that we're going to lose a congressional seat and an Electoral College vote, and our control over our own federal government will thereby be diluted. If the Yale study is right, that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 23 to 25 million illegal aliens in America, that means a shift of more than 30 congressional seats and 30 Electoral College votes from law-abiding states that don't have large illegal alien populations to sanctuary-type states, by way of example, that have large illegal alien populations. And that shift can control who the President of the United States is, it can control who the Speaker of the House is, and it can control whether Republicans or Democrats are in charge of the House of Representatives. So it's a fight worth fighting.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for our listeners to know, there are 435 House members, and that is a set number. So what you're saying is that if a census comes up and says, well, it looks like California has added 1 or 2 million inhabitants to its state since the last census, therefore we're going to take those 435 House members, and the way we distribute them to the country is we're going to go ahead and take out some of those that maybe are one for Alabama, and we're going to give it to California because in proportion to the rest of the country, they have now more inhabitants. And what's happening is that the census is including illegal immigrants in that number.
Sure. States like Alabama, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, we can go down a long list of them.
So this really shouldn't
hurt to the extent the census includes illegal aliens in the head count for the purposes of distribution of political power at the congressional seat level and the Electoral College vote level.
So this really shouldn't be a partisan issue, because who's to say that those representatives that are going to be taken from states with lower populations are going to be one party or another? This should concern the whole country.
It should, but unfortunately the way it has worked out, the Democrat states typically are the ones that have higher than average illegal alien counts. And so, of course, the Democrats are going to oppose every effort to try to make sure that every American citizen's vote carries relatively equal weight.
Now, tell us a little bit about your lawsuit. So in the lawsuit, you're saying that this is a violation of the Constitution. Can you explain to us why this is a violation of the Constitution?
Well, there are 2 arguments, and bear in mind this is a lawsuit by the state of Alabama, as represented by the Attorney General of the state of Alabama, Steve Marshall.
Right.
Steve asked me to join in as a United States Congressman, and I readily agreed to do that. 2 arguments are being advanced, and the Attorney General could cover these arguments much better than I can, but nonetheless, one argument is that the provisions in the Constitution dealing with Electoral College votes and congressmen, and also the one-man, one-vote principles of the 14th Amendment, suggest that the original founders of our country, the original writers of the United States Constitution, intended for Americans to be determinative of how many congressmen each state gets. That's one argument. The second argument is based solely on the 14th Amendment, equal protection, and you probably have heard of one man, one vote principles. Those are the principles that require each of our congressional seats, say in the state of Alabama and in every other state, to be almost exactly equal in population. If one congressional seat were, by way of example, to have 700,000 people, while another congressional seat has 800,000 people, well, that congressional seat that has 700,000 people, that means that each citizen's vote in that congressional district is worth more than the vote of citizens in the 800,000 congressional seat district. And we're supposed to avoid that kind of dilution of voting rights by American citizens. And if you count illegal aliens, there might be some districts in the United States of America where half of the citizens make up where the citizenry makes up half of the population, and non-citizens make up the other half of the population. That means those citizens' votes are worth twice as much in their congressional district, in their Electoral College vote, as a congressional seat that might be 100% American citizens, where you have twice as many American citizens still only getting to elect one congressman and having one Electoral College vote.
So here's where this issue seems to overlap with federalism, because on the one hand, you're hearing people say the Electoral College as an institution is unjust because it gives more political weight to, say, people in Wyoming or Montana, populations, states with lower populations in California. But that just shows a misunderstanding of federalism, because on the one hand, you've got states, congressmen are apportioned according to population, but there's also an equality of states that the Constitution comprehends, and that's seen most especially in the Senate. And you're a congressman, but you're still tasked with looking out for the interests of people in Alabama. So how can you help us understand how federalism overlaps with this issue of the census?
Well, let me talk about it in terms of Electoral College vote and disregard the federalism aspect for a moment. There would be no United States of America if it wasn't done this way. You had small states, well, actually, back then, small nations. They were colonies. We won a revolution. Then they were independent nations. And it wasn't until we came together with the Articles of Confederation in 1783 and then the United States Constitution 7 or 8 years later that we actually had the United States of America. And the smaller colonies, i.e. nation states, after we won the Revolutionary War, they were fearful that they would have little to no power in the governing body of this federal government that was being created. And so the wisdom of our founding fathers was to give power to the populated states via the House of Representatives, where that power is distributed based on population, but give power to each of the individual states, no matter how big or how small, by having the United States Senate, where each state had two people representing them in the United States Senate. And then there was a compromise for the election of the presidency, whereby both population and individual nation state had their interests represented by the combining of those two to form the Electoral College. So if we didn't have this compromise, you probably would not have seen nation states like Rhode Island or maybe Georgia or maybe Connecticut join the United States. And so we may not have ever been founded as a country. So this is one of the compromises that was forced upon our founders in order to form our union.
And so that doesn't bode well for the future if we were to abandon it then.
Well, I don't think we're going to abandon it. I don't think there's any chance in the world that you're going to get rid of the Electoral College, and the reason is you have to have a 3/4 consensus of the states in order to do so. And the lesser populated states are not about to give up their two senators or the two votes those two senators represent in the Electoral College. So I don't think you have to worry about it. People can talk about wanting to get rid of the Electoral College all they want to, but states like Alaska and Wyoming and Connecticut and Rhode Island, Idaho, they're not going to give up their political power.
So what can you tell us about the progress of this case right now? Where is it? Is it still being processed, or where is it in its development?
It is at the early stage. Quite frankly, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to issue an opinion on whether the Census Bureau can ask the citizenship question. If you don't have the answer to whether people are foreigners or American citizens, and if foreigners, whether they are legal foreigners or illegal aliens, then there is no way to know which counts of people should count for the purposes of distribution of federal political power to the House of Representatives on the one hand, and for the election of the president via the Electoral College on the other hand. So as soon as we get that Supreme Court decision on whether the Census Bureau has the right to ask the citizenship question, then our lawsuit immediately comes to the forefront.
Okay, so will you perhaps drop the case then if the Supreme Court does uphold the secretary's decision to try and put a citizenship question on the census?
Well, I'm not in a position to answer that. I'd have to talk with Steve Marshall, our Attorney General, in as much as he represents the state of Alabama, and I'm one of two plaintiffs, with the state of Alabama being the other. But it's problematic if the Census Bureau has no way of knowing it when it counts bodies, whether those bodies are American citizens, lawful immigrants, or illegal aliens.
Right.
Right, and I actually, I was doubtful about the prospects of the citizenship question lawsuit that is in the Supreme Court right now, because of administrative law procedures, which, that's what we talked about 2 weeks in our show. We talked about how those sometimes can be a problem for a constitutional republic. But in reading your case, it seemed to me that it has a lot of promise because it's challenging this idea that you can count people that are not here legally, and it's challenging it on constitutional grounds, which I think it should be the way that we approach these issues.
Well, if I had to guess, and it's always risky to guess what the Supreme Court is going to do, but the legal gurus generally are saying that the arguments bode well for asking the citizenship question, and that there is a good probability that the Census Bureau will be allowed to ask people in America whether they are citizens or not. So that bodes well. That's a good indicator. But again, you don't know for sure until the Supreme Court's going to rule.
Right. You never know, and sometimes a lot of times actually the gurus tend to end up being wrong when it comes to Supreme Court cases.
Well, like Justice Roberts.
Right.
He's rendered some rather weird decisions that, in my judgment, violated his oath to the United States Constitution. But he has a bigger say on that than I do, and he's ruled the way he has ruled, including that it's perfectly legal for the federal government to dictate to people which products to buy or not buy. Now, I never would have thought in a land of liberty and a land of freedom that the federal government would have that kind of power, but Justice Roberts felt so.
Yeah,
so you never know. We thought he was a conservative.
Right. We live in surprising times. So to play devil's advocate here, just to try to understand what your opponents to the case would say, it seems to me that there's two ways of criticizing your case. On the one hand is sort of the moral argument to say, well, it's immoral not to count illegal immigrants. And I'm sure reading your case that you would just say, actually, it's immoral to count them because that your duty is to protect the interests of the American citizens and the American people. But I'm interested in your response to what you might consider the practical argument, where people would say, well, the census distributes money, federal money as well, as representatives for apportionment. And so it's really important that federal funds get distributed in a way that is commensurate with the population. So if the census says there's X number of people here, but really there's more than that, and the number of monies that get sent to those states is not in proportion, that's a problem. What is your response to people who would say that?
Well, tell me which one you want to focus on first, because you brought up multiple.
Sure. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come right back and get to both of those.
Okay, so you're listening to Citizen Talk, the show that is restoring prudence to politics. I'm Juan Davalos.
And I'm Clifford Humphrey, and you're listening to Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM.
We're talking to Congressman Brooks from the 5th District of Alabama. We'll be right back after the break. And remember, you can look for Citizen Talk in SoundCloud or the WRFH Radio Free Hillsdale podcast. Please contact us also on Facebook. Our group is at Citizen Talk FM, or on Twitter. Send us any questions or any comments you have. Please email us also at citizentalkfm@gmail.com. Welcome back to Citizen Talk, the show that restores prudence to politics. I'm Juan Davalos.
And I'm Clifford Humphrey, sitting in for Lynette Grunvig.
And you're listening to Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. You can also listen to us in your podcast app or SoundCloud. We've been discussing with Representative Brooks from the 5th District of Alabama a little bit about the lawsuit that the state of Alabama has brought against the Department of Commerce because of the census and the fact that the census is including illegal immigrants in their count, and how that is affecting the distribution of representatives in the states, and therefore the distribution of Electoral College votes for the different states. So before the break, Clifford, take it again with the question that you had for Representative
So right before
Brooks.
the break, I was trying to play devil's advocate and present the arguments that the opposition would probably bring. And I said, on the one hand, they would probably say it's immoral to not to count illegal immigrants who are in our country, and on the other hand, it's not practical, or it's poor judgment to say that the census must reflect an accurate number of the people who are actually living here, regardless of whether they're citizens or not. So, Congressman, if you would maybe start with the second one. What's your response to people who say the census number must reflect the actual number of people who are here, regardless of whether they're citizens or not, because schools need to be funded with the accurate number of monies, and roads need to be repaired based upon the number of people who are traveling on them? What would you say to that?
The criteria for distribution of federal taxpayer money ought to be how many American taxpayers there are. And citizenry is the best indicator of how many citizens there are in a particular region of the country that we are responsible for. We are not responsible for, and should not be responsible for, every non-citizen on the planet who happens to come to America legally or illegally. That's not our primary function as elected officials at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, or at the federal level. If we're going to be a country, then our responsibility should be to the citizens of our country.
Yeah, that sounds pretty straightforward, and in a way, I think that answers the first question. But I'll let you maybe elaborate if you want to a little bit. And I like how you were saying that this is a matter of justice. But would you like to say anything else to the people who would say Nancy Pelosi is famous for saying a border wall is an immorality? Why is it not immoral to count not to count illegal immigrants?
It's neither moral nor immoral. The issue is not morality. The issue is, what does the United States Constitution require? And the 14th Amendment is very clear. Supreme Court decisions are very clear that it's one person, one vote. And now what does that mean? It means that each vote cast by a citizen is supposed to have equal weight in the election of elected officials. And if you count non-citizens in some parts for the distribution of congressional seats and Electoral College purposes, then you are throwing away the principle of one man, one vote that has been in existence for a long period of American history. And it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
that each person's vote should carry the same weight to the election of congressmen and to the election of the president, who in turn run our own federal government.
Right. It would seem to me that it would actually be immoral to count other people who are not citizens, because then you're taking away their consent. You're taking away their right to be represented by changing how the representation works.
Yeah, and to paraphrase, I think what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in a way, it's true. If we want to have a country, we're going to have borders and a distinction between citizens and non-citizens. Likewise, if we're going to have states, then we need to be able to distinguish who the representatives that reflect the accurate number of citizens in those states. Otherwise, you have a nation of California that's basically going to be ruling the rest of the states.
Are we going to be the United States of America, or are we going to be the United Nations?
Right.
Are our governments going to be controlled by our citizenry? Yes or no? And to give you an idea of how radical the Democrat socialists are on that particular issue, the Socialist Democrats in a number of municipalities have made it legal for anyone to register to vote, whether they're an American citizen or an illegal alien or a lawful immigrant, the largest such city being San Francisco, stealing from American citizens their own government.
Congressman, I wonder, is there any way that other citizens in other states can maybe contact their attorney generals or attorneys general rather? Is there some? How can other states help Alabama in this effort to make this argument before the Supreme Court?
Every state that supports one man, one vote principles, every state which is concerned about losing a congressional seat or an electoral college vote, or which has already, in the last census or two, lost an electoral college vote or a congressional seat, they can always join our lawsuit or file their own lawsuit in order to get back that congressional seat or electoral college vote that is rightfully theirs, but for the illegal conduct of illegal aliens.
And we'd like to remind our listeners that actually, as a result of the 2010 census, 9 states lost representatives. Those are Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, I think it's Mississippi, Montana, North Carolina, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So if you're in one of those states, you should be contacting your representatives and asking them to join this lawsuit.
And each of those states sounds like a state that has a below average illegal alien count. Therefore, the counting of illegal aliens probably played a role in the loss of their congressional seats and electoral college vote that in turn determines their representation and their influence over their federal government in Washington, D.C.
Now, what you see going on in the country regarding sanctuary cities, where a lot of these blue states, or sanctuary states even, a lot of these blue states like California are saying to illegal immigrants, that's okay, you can come over here, we won't report you to ICE or any federal authority that you are an illegal. Do you think this is some sort of political strategy to try to get more political power and financial power by affecting the numbers in the 2020 census?
The Socialist Democrats do not like the American citizenry that has grown up in America for a couple of reasons. One, we're more likely to know American history. We're more likely to know the importance of free enterprise and the evils of socialism. And we're more likely to vote Republican than the Democrats prefer. So what the Democrat strategy is to import as many foreign-born individuals as possible and get them voting rights as quickly as possible in order to dilute the votes of American citizens who were born here. Now, bear in mind, we are a very welcoming nation, particularly on the lawful immigration side. We're perhaps the most generous nation on the planet. Certainly, we give out more citizenships, our highest honor, to foreign-born individuals than any other country on the planet. In fact, we give out almost as many as every other nation on earth. So we have a very generous lawful immigration system. But when you throw the illegal alien population count on top of that, that's when it really starts to burden both American citizens and lawful immigrants.
What do you say? Because I'm actually a product. I'm a naturalized citizen. I came to the United States when I was 19 years old, and so I'm very thankful for the legal process of becoming a citizen of the United States. And I think it's good for people that want to become citizens of the United States to go through that legal process, because it helps them in the process of assimilating to this is a nation of laws. In order to come here, you have to follow certain laws and you have to follow certain procedures to do that. So it's already helping people understand there are laws here that you need to follow in order to be a member of this society. And so what is that saying to illegal immigrants, that we're just letting them come to the United States? We're not doing much to deport them, and on top of that, we're giving them essentially representation in Congress. So it's actually hurting them in not being able to understand what America is all about, that we are ruled by laws here, and it's actually corrupting the populace, in my opinion.
Well, the illegal aliens that are coming into America, I don't think it's hurting them so much, because they believe, their choice is that it's better to be an illegal alien in America than a lawful citizen in their home country.
Right.
And so I understand why they're doing what they're doing, but my focus has to be, first and foremost, on American citizens, and then closely thereafter, lawful immigrants who have come to our country. And it is hurting American citizens and lawful immigrants in a variety of ways. It's hurting with wage suppression and loss of jobs. It's hurting with victimization of crimes. There are over 30,000 Americans and lawful immigrants who are killed each year because of our porous southern border. Some 2,000 or so are homicides by illegal aliens committed on American soil. Another 30,000 all by itself are deaths that are attributable to drug overdoses, particularly heroin and cocaine, that come across our southern border because it's so porous. So you've got the adverse criminal effect. Then you've got the adverse effect on monies that governments need in order to provide services to the American citizenry. Illegal aliens are a net tax loss of about $116 billion a year at the city, county, state, and federal level when you add it up. And that $116 billion deficit caused by illegal aliens has to be made up by American citizens and lawful immigrants. And that in turn decreases their standard of living. So there are all sorts of adverse effects to us having the porous borders, but the Democrats are willing to accept those deaths. They're willing to accept those tax losses. They're willing to accept every other adverse effect of illegal aliens in the belief that long term it will help give them control of the federal government and city, county, and states government, in turn enabling Democrats to forcefully impose socialism on us and depriving us of free enterprise, which of course is based on liberty.
What's ironic to me is that a lot of the illegal immigrants, as I understand it, are fleeing countries where there is no rule of law, where corruption is just a normal way of life, and they're fleeing that to come to a country that does honor the rule of law, but they're coming by means of breaking the law. And I don't. It seems to be naive to think that we can just ignore the law for a number of years, number of decades even, and then return to a state of the rule of law once the Democrats get in control, or once whatever their desire is realized.
It's a high-risk proposition what the Democrats are forcing on America.
Now, Congressman Brooks, I have one last question for you. You have, I know that you ran for the Senate seat in your state a couple years back. Will you be running for the Senate seat again?
Not in 2020. I don't know if you want background on it. I can explain why, but the answer is no.
Yeah, sure. Give us some background.
In 2017, my campaign had representations from the White House that President Trump would either endorse me or be neutral. We didn't anticipate an endorsement, but we thought he'd be neutral. As such, I ran for the United States Senate, was in very good shape about 10 days out, and then Mitch McConnell and some others persuaded Donald Trump to breach the pledge that was made. He endorsed another candidate, and the net result was that I came in third out of 9 candidates instead of second, and then in a runoff, which we would have won, and then in a general election that we would have won. But instead, we elected a Democrat in Ruby Red, Alabama. And I've been bit once, and I wanted to make sure that there was no chance whatsoever that if I ran for the United States Senate this go-around, President Trump would end up again succumbing to the wily ways of some of the political forces in Washington and endorse somebody else. And I did not get the warm, fuzzy, comfortable feeling in me with the pledges that were made by the White House this go-around, which were very similar to what happened in 2017. And so based on that problem, I decided not to run.
That sounds prudent.
Yes, and we do hope that you consider it in the future.
Yeah.
Well, we may have an open seat in 2022, and I'll consider it then, particularly if the Democrats manage to take over the White House. In Alabama, I believe we would then want a much more aggressive United States senator, someone whose style is closer to what I offer.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Congressman Brooks. It's really been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure, and keep it up with Hillsdale College. You guys are great.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And we've been talking with Congressman Brooks, again from the 5th District of Alabama, and it's been a great conversation because he's done a really good job of explaining the importance of the Electoral College, the importance of representatives in each state, and how the 2020 census will affect the representatives on each state, how many representatives each state has, and how counting illegal immigrants or anybody who's actually not a citizen of the United States in that census will affect those numbers. And you have states like Ohio and states, other states, Pennsylvania, that will possibly lose seats in the House of Representatives because of that 2020 census.
Yeah, and it's important to note that some states that are really sparsely populated, Montana, Wyoming, already have the bare minimum number of Electoral College votes. They've already been stripped bare, and when reapportionment happens after the census, they can't lose anymore. So they'll have to be picked from another state. But it's sort of tragic that those states have been reduced to their absolute bare minimum according to the Constitution, with 2 senators and 1 representative. But
yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, because then those states, I think they have just 1 representative.
Yeah.
Then. So basically, you're voting for 3 senators.
Right.
In it's one which has not a lot of power, but
right.
It's a statewide election for 1 representative.
Right. And I liked how the congressman always framed his argument in terms of justice among the states and his duty. He has a duty to represent the interests of the people of Alabama and the people of America as well. And he's saying, I'm not able to fulfill my obligation if the census takes into account people who are not under my duty as that I swore to uphold the Constitution. So it's sad that this has been reduced to a partisan issue, and yet I wonder, are there not representatives in more liberal states or more purple states? Is there not some Democratic congressman who's had his position for a long time and really likes it? Is he willing to say, for the cause of the Democratic Party, I'm willing to just give up my district and let it be absorbed into the rest of my state, and I'll just disappear, and some new district in California will appear?
Right. That's when we should follow the founders' understanding of human nature. We talk in this show about human nature sometimes, and you have to appeal to that self-preservation aspect in human nature, in which representatives want to keep their job. They don't want to let go of it. So Republicans should appeal to the Democrats in those states like Ohio and say, do you really want to lose your job because California is going to gain another seat from they have, I think, 53 representatives right now. They're just going to gain another one because non-citizens are being counted in the census. it seems to me that they should be appealing to those Democrats that may stand to lose a seat.
Right, and the congressman did allude to he is very confident that the Electoral College is never going to go away because it requires the consent of some of these smaller population states like Alaska, Wyoming.
Right.
And he says you can count on their being interested in that. And I think that points to an identity as an American as that includes this identity as a member of a state. And that's something I think we've just lost over a long period of time. And as people move around, you don't really have a loyalty to a state. At least a lot of people don't. And I think it's important to understand that as he was describing, the founders' understanding of the Constitution was an agreement of peoples in states, and they had that understanding, and it's all right to be jealous for Alabama and the sake of the people that are there,
right?
Even if there's a large population of illegal immigrants that are living in another state, why should the people of Alabama lose representation in Congress? That I think it is a matter of justice.
Right, and I think you mentioned to me this over the break that Madison in Federalist 58 says that the House represents citizens. It doesn't represent anybody. It represents actual citizens of the country. And so as a representative in the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress, he should be worried about his citizens, not other people that may be there without the consent of the citizens of the state of Alabama.
Yeah, that's a great point. If people are interested, in Federalist 43, James Madison addresses this topic sort of indirectly, but it's the best place, I think, to go and look, where he's talking about the Republican Guarantee Clause in the Constitution, whereby the federal government is empowered through the Constitution to make sure that the states each have a Republican government. And what does that mean? It means that the government is filled with officers who are elected by the people, and by the people it means the citizens of those states, and that those people are counted as equally under the law, right, as citizens. So I would suggest people go look there if they're interested in learning a little bit more about this. So Federalist 43, and it's also in Federalist 58, as you mentioned, where he equates inhabitants with citizens.
Well, I look forward to seeing what happens with both of these lawsuits. I'm encouraged to hear the Congressman Brooks say that it looks like the New York lawsuit in the Supreme Court right now bodes well. Hopefully, if that one fails, this one will succeed. But it's been a great show. You're listening to Citizen Talk, the show that is restoring prudence to politics. I'm Juan Davalos.
And I'm Clifford Humphrey.
And you're listening to Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. Remember, you can listen to us also on SoundCloud and podcast. And please email us any questions you have at citizentalk@gmail.com, citizentalkfm@gmail.com. You can also look for us on our Facebook page or Twitter @CitizenTalkFM. We'll see you next week.